My great pleasure to welcome Angus Shaw to the series. Um, and Angus, I just want to say, this series, as you know, is all about the military and soldiering and one thing and another. But you've certainly made your name more as a reporter and a journalist than as a soldier. And I just want to say I salute you for your courage and commitment over many, many years, involving yourself in a very dangerous profession. And unlike most of the media that I've watched over the years, I think you showed enormous courage and commitment, not to any necessarily political standpoint, but to the truth and trying to get the truth out to the world. Unfortunately, there were not too many of your caliber of reporter around, and I think that's one of the reasons why the wrong signal reached the world about what was actually going on in our country. But welcome, Angus, and thanks for your time.
Thanks, Angus. Thank you.
Angus, let's just kick off with the early years and farming family, Nabira Farm, and early days with the Duke of Montrose, Angus Graham. Very interesting individual and quite an important personality in our history.
Yes. Well, he was the neighbor. He was our neighbor on the farm. He was next door, Dairy Farm, which he was raising these rare Brahman cattle and all those sort of things. And um, when my father came very close to him, um, and this was before, of course, he joined the RF and became Ian Smith's defense minister. He was at defense. He was the defense minister at UDI, and they had to have a unanimous agreement to declare UDI, and Lord Graham was on that. But I knew him quite well because he was my godfather, and my father made him my godfather, which was um, which was difficult later on because after my father died in '57, Lord Graham took over the farm. And in those days, it was the money issues and the estate was carved up by Lord Graham, and I and my two brothers didn't do too well out of it. So we sort of had a falling out with Lord Graham, and all those neighbours, as I said, as I've written about, all those neighbours, Boss Lawford and Tiny Rowland and all those guys used to come to my old man's farm where he hosted these rather splendid farm luncheons. I was very small then, but I do remember them. And then because my mother had died a bit earlier, and because there was a tussle over the farm, um, we went to sort of boarding and orphan schools, um, and were pretty much left on our own until the High Court resolved Lord Graham to pay my brothers and I, who were all three of us were underage at that stage, so it was all very complicated.
What schools, Angus?
Well, I went to Lilfordia,
Mhm.
and then to Eagle in the Bumba,
Okay.
um, and then where the Elim Mission
Yeah.
massacre was later on,
Yeah.
and we um, at Eagle then the plan was for us to move on to Umtali Boys High, but by now the High Court had sorted things out, and my maternal grandfather thought it was better if I went to do my A levels in the UK, which I did. So I did A levels in the UK and started my journalistic training in the UK, and then came back in 1972.
1972. Eh? So where did
Yeah.
you do your pre-A level years? At
Pre A
Lord.
level at no at Eagle, and then briefly at Umtali Boys High, but
Ah,
very briefly, and then off to the UK with the little money that my the High Court. Oh wait, sorry. Yeah, so uh, went to boarding school in the UK for a short time and did A levels and then came back.
Angus, a famous Eagle old boy is Richard Dawkins. Is that correct?
Richard,
Dawkins, the author of God Is Not Great.
it doesn't ring a bell, but I was earlier than that. We were there in the 50s, and um, there was a headmaster was a man called Claude Mello, and then Dick. Oh,
Moore.
anyway, Dick
Yeah, I
Moore. Yeah,
remember.
Dick Moore.
I remember
Yeah,
those guys. Because I'm I'm Tali boy.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
did you remember the Hildebrands? Were you there with Ross and the
It, re-
Hildebrand
it re-
boys?
well, those names ring a bell, but
Yeah,
hell, and it's a long time ago.
yeah.
It's a long
No,
time
because
ago.
they were from the Burma Valley, the three
Yeah,
brothers, and they all went to Eagle. Might have been contemporaries of yours. But Angus, so you after school, train as a journalist, back
yeah.
to what was then Rhodesia, and let's talk about Altina Farm. That's when you you really start getting into the reporting business.
After the Sonoya battle in '66, when the Rhodesians hammered them, um, there were seven insurgents, I don't know what terms we use
Yeah.
these days, who were killed, and it became known as a victory. And in those days, we thought it was um, it was a law and order issue, and we could crush it easily, and we wouldn't be overrun. Um, but then Herbert Chitepo was chairman of ZANU then in Zambia, and he reviewed the whole process and decided that they weren't um, ready for massive incursions because they hadn't politicized the people, the Pobo, and so they were getting no support. And in fact, the Sonoya 7, Chinoy heroes now, they're the Chinoy 7 heroes, um, became the sort of time for ZANU to withdraw and reorganize the plan according to the rules of guerrilla warfare, if you like. The sort of Chairman Mao thing that, um, a guerrilla must swim in the shoal like a fish in the shoal. And Tepe realized they hadn't done that, and they were easily found in combat and killed the first seven. And so they went back to the drawing board essentially.
Mm.
Looked at more possibilities of training from the Russians and the Chinese, um, who also told them that they should politicize the people and get support from the people and not get ratted on by people by informants to the Rhodesian government and the Rhodesian security forces. And it took them up until Altena Farm, Mark the Bullgraves thing. When I was at the Herald, I'd been at the Herald for a few months then, and that sort of symbolized to us the beginning of the struggle in the sharp end, which was then going to escalate, as you know, much later, all the way down the eastern border. And most of the political figures that are around today, apart from many of them who, of course, have died of old age and whatever. But that's when it all began for us. And Rhodesians started announcing conscription, compulsory conscription for able-bodied young white men, which I was. But then being the media, they didn't trust us, being at the Herald and everything, which which then was surprisingly regarded officially as something of a sort of left of
Opposition.
centre,
Yes.
left of centre,
Angus, did you actually go to the scene of the crime, as it were, to Altina, to report on the ground?
No, no, but even still, then I was, a young reporter, and uh, they got someone from the Manika Post, Umtali Post, to do all that. No, it wasn't Umtali Post. Anyway, it wasn't me, and we just watched all. And again, we thought, oh, this is only a flash in the pan, But then then the mobilization of the insurgents started much more seriously, and the Rhodesians sort of gave us media people exemptions until 75, because they thought that we couldn't hold a secret. If we went to serve, we would sort of leak stuff.
So,
Because
so
as
tell
I
us
say,
about your experience, Angus. You conscripted, I imagine, Llewellyn Barracks. Did you have too much hair on your head for the
yeah, well, we were
induction?
we were sort of media types then, Hannes. We were sort of prototype Rhodesian hippies, um, and we were quickly shorn of our hair. That dreadful train journey from Salisbury to Heaney Junction, um, and the stresses of being met by rather intimidating officers from Llewellyn at Heaney Junction, and then they said, "Well, this looks like a bunch of shit. We'll soon knock this shower of shit into into shape," which they did. And it was quite gruesome at Llewellyn. I mean, um, as I say, we were prototype hippies. We lived a fairly loose lifestyle then, and suddenly we were confronted with drill parades and things to make us aggressive. Like there was we had a bayonet fighting training, and we said, being sort of media and sort of liberal types, well, you don't fight bayonets in this war. Um, no, but we're gonna train you to use them anyway. And what they did was put sandbags on some trees by the parade ground at Llewellyn. Gave us the bayonets, but then they had to get us aggressive. So we um, we were on the parade ground for like 2 hours with our FNs, and we had to raise them above our heads and jog on the spot, and get really. The RSM was trying to get us really angry, which we were. And then we were frog marched to the trees where the sandbags were, and we were told, "You got to. Those are turs," as we used to say, and you've got to go and rip their guts out. We thought, oh, shit. Okay, that's bayonet fighting, is it? And so it happened, and by now we were hell of a angry, because we were sweating. It was hot. Um, we'd been on the parade ground for 2 hours just for the RSM to get us angry. So we got our aggression up, and then when we were all lined up, we said, "This is the terrorist who's murdered your mother and raped your sister. Can't you see the blood dripping down her legs and all that?" And, um, so we're pretty bloody angry then. So we went and ripped these sandbags to pieces, um, and the officers were quite pleased with that. They said, "Oh, we can make soldiers out of them yet," because. And then when this we'd ripped all those sandbags to bits, you know. We sort of felt, gee, a bit ashamed. But then the officer said, no, that's to get your aggression up, because you media types are too laid back. You've got to get into the spirit of this thing, you see. and and there was no looking back after that. We did all the necessary rifle range training and stuff like that, and it was tough, and none of us were fit when we arrived, and when we left. Uh, we were as fit as a fiddle, I tell you. And um, soon after, we were given an active service call up in Matabeleland and down to the Guai and those areas where there wasn't much activity, because that was Zipra area, which was very much um, a different approach to things than Zanla up in the northeast and the east. But anyway, these active service call-ups went on. Oh, right up until 79. And it was it was difficult for me because I was a journalist at the Herald. Then I was transferred from Herald to IANA, the Inter-African News Agency, who were controlled by SAPA, the South African Press Association. And by now, all these frontline summits were going on, with the nationalists and the regional presidents. And so I was sent to cover those. So then I started getting interested in the other side of the story, why they were doing this. And well, we obviously knew because this was Harold Macmillan had done his Winds of Change thing, and we were defying all that, and with UDI, and um, we were sort of pretty much out on a limb. So we had to fight it, and it it stopped. It became an all-consuming thing. Um, life in Salisbury became quite decadent because we went off to call ups for 6 weeks at a time. Came back aggressive, drained, you know, um, and a lot of a lot of my young contemporaries then, um, became hell of aggressive, and their and characters actually change. War does that to people. I mean, you kill or be killed, as they say, and civilian life was very strange in Salisbury then, as you know. Um, we had
Angus, I mean, in the midst of this, now you're a serving Rhodesian soldier, and then you sent off to Lusaka to cover Henry Kissinger's intervention and bringing.
yeah, all that stuff. Yeah.
Just talk about that. I mean, you must have felt very exposed, being in basically enemy territory now as a reporter.
Well, that's right. And at one point, when Kissinger came back from seeing Forster and John Forster and Ian Smith, he wanted to meet the guerrilla fighting leadership, and they came up to Lusaka, and I was there covering all this, and that's where I first met Mugabe. Actually, that was 75. No, late 75, 76, I think. There was a whole lot of shuttle diplomacy going on,
Yes.
and we
Yeah.
and we went to Tanzania, we went to Mozambique, as an offshoot from the various summits, and everyone was there. The Angolan guy Neto was there, and Samora brought some of the Zandler leadership there. Now I'd known some of them before the war started from my Herald days, and as it turned out, I was denounced by them. Having met them, Simon Muzenda, all the chefs, JZ Moyo, and all those guys who knew me from before, um, and they sort of said, and they denounced me, and Kaunda deported me. But that didn't stop me continued to travel around the region when I was working for SAPA.
Angus, the Kissinger period, a lot of going on there, and that is in the aftermath of Tongaggara and the Nari rebellion. Just talk a bit about
Yes,
that and Tongaggara being expelled from Zambia over Chitepo's demise.
yes. We covered the Nari and from Lusaka and elsewhere, and it was very vicious. There was intense rivalry in Zanla for the leadership. Um, we always believed that Rex Nongo, later General Solomon Majuru, was very much involved, but there were two sides of the thing, and Tongaggara's people. Um, they finally, well, there was bloodshed, and we saw the shallow graves along Leopard's Hill Road in Lusaka, which was there was some bush there past the golf course, and there were shallow graves found there, and so there was a lot of bloodletting, which of course made the Rhodesians happy. You see, they are now doing all this, and so we've got a bit of a respite because they're fighting amongst themselves rather than fighting us. Um, and then, of course, Utepo gets killed, and that was very much. I went to the Commission of Inquiry that Kaunda held. That was very much, again, part of the internal fighting, and in this case, it was. It was Manika versus Karanga, essentially. And then Tongaggara, of course, and two others were arrested for killing Tutepa. But it came out of the inquiry that the bomb that was put on the front wheel of his VW was provided by Rex Noga. So it all became very complicated, and then Tongagara and the others were detained by Kawanda. They had a trial, which I covered, and it was extraordinary because Tongagara comes in up from the cells with his two colleagues, raises the Zenla fist and everything, and there's a great cheering, and Mugabe and Muzenda were in the front row of the gallery, and Tongo comes over and embraces Mugabe and Muzenda, and then he goes on. The court case was fascinating because there's no pleas of guilty or anything, but political expediency required them to be released. Whether they were guilty or not, it was never established. But certainly Tongagara was a leader of a faction.
A dissenting faction.
Sorry?
He was the leader of a dissenting faction.
Yes, and but the political expediency was that did they kill Chitepa? It was never established in the court. It was a political thing, and Ernest Sakala, who was the prosecutor for the Zambians, said to us outside, we've got to let this thing go. We're under huge pressure from the frontline states. Justice doesn't have to be seen to be done here. It is a political expedient. Our judicial system cannot interrupt the Zimbabwe struggle, so we've got to let these guys out. And they came out of the court, the old Lusaka courthouse with the lions outside, those big sculptures. Yes. And they were raised on shoulder high. They went off to a big rally at Makeni in the Zambian sort of township area, and we all went along there and heard all this. This ZANU propaganda, if you like to say. I mean, it was incredible stuff, and I was of the opinion then that, and there were hundreds at this rally, this Tongagara rally, and singing, chanting, revolutionary songs, distributing leaflets with Mao Zedong stuff on it, and the white settler, this and that, blah blah blah. Must be driven from the land. And Muzenda then asked me to come and interview Mugabe. So he's staying at the Intercontinental in Lusaka. And so I go in there and offers me a drink of orange juice. It was a huge jug of iced orange juice on the table in front of us. Anyway. And he was saying things to me like, "So we know you. We've we know that we want you to put our message on the breakfast tables of the racists in South Africa and Rhodesia." I said, "Well, I'm not. I'm just going to give the thing its news value and stuff." And so he said, "All right." And we met several times later on. In Mozambique and Tanzania, and we became quite friendly actually, and we were on first name terms. So I wasn't a courier for his message, but I gave it its news value, if you like, and he was pleased that I was taking the message to the breakfast tables of Rhodesia and South Africa.
Angus, was the possibility that Chitepa had been eliminated by Rhodesian agents discussed? Did that come up?
No. That became the common myth that was promoted, by a couple of journalists and whatever. There was never any proof of that, and the Kawanda's Commission of Inquiry certainly did not reach that conclusion, and that was an international commission of inquiry that he had. And there's all sorts of conspiracy theories and stuff, but it would never, at the International Commission of Inquiry, it was never, it was essentially clamped down upon by Cohen because you couldn't have all the dirty laundry coming out
Mm.
because that was, that would hurt the political struggle. It was the same time as Andreas Shipanga had been arrested in he was the Namibian guy, the Southwest Africa People's Organization guy. He'd been arrested, and his people in Zambia, and his people went for a writ of habeas corpus, and it's, the Zambians were saying to us that the judicial system was essentially a colonial hangover. It stood in the way of liberation, so these things had to be dealt with. And as I say, that there was no evidence that the assassination. We had all the forensic details in the court, Hannes. We had the old VW where the bomb was in the front wheel hub, and Chitepo's driver reversed up 30 meters or something. The thing should have gone off straight away, but it was incompetently done. But he still blew up 30 meters outside his front door and killed the neighbor's daughter. So it was the forensics showed that it was not a great professional job actually, but it worked though. It worked, and he was killed. And then the whole thing sort of, there was rivalry amongst the leadership.
Your position very unusual, possibly unique. In between all this, basically consorting with the enemy, you back home, and you still doing your call-ups, and you end up hitting a landmine somewhere.
Yes. We were based at Motoko, and had to go right up to the border, Yamapanda and all those areas. Very rocky, bad terrain, gomos and very difficult terrain. And what do we call them now? We call them insurgents, do we? Terrorists or whatever. They hid in the gomos there. There was good air. There was good foliage coverage so they could hide away from our air support, and no, it was pretty nasty. And we thought this road had been swept by the Pookies or something, and boom, it hit a double popper, as we called it. And that's where I got a spinal injury, which was manageable, but now it's giving me troubles because it's like old rugby players, Most of my old rugby player friends have got new knees and new hips and stuff. Your bones begin to crumble later, and that laid me out for 6 months, the spinal injury. But then I was deemed fit enough, and back to the bush.
And also back to then you go to Uganda to cover Idi Amin, which is an interesting.
Yeah, that was
chapter in the life.
79. Yeah, 79. That was Idi Amin wouldn't. His borders were essentially sealed, and we were sent to sit in Nairobi and listen to Uganda radio, Tanzanian radio, and write our dispatches. And then when Julius Nyerere decided to invade, because Idi had invaded northern Tanzania, then we knew the writing was on the wall and Idi was going to go. So we all went in there, and it was pretty horrendous. I mean, even having seen contacts and mayhem in the war, in our war, I mean, it was pretty damn horrendous. Bodies on the streets, and we were there when they opened Luzira prison, which was his sort of high security torture prison, and people were crawling. The Tanzanians blew down the gates, and people were crawling out of there, prisoners, torture victims, some starved. I mean, with protruding ribs and so on. I mean, it was horrendous, and some of them were just injured beyond belief by torture. And we went to the cells, and they had all these torture machines there, electric shock machines. They had a thing called the bell, a barrel. It's the rim of a truck, and you tie the guy's head into the rim of the truck, and then you hit the rim with an iron bar, and it drives you crazy. I mean, it bursts your eardrums and everything. And we saw all that shit, and I thought, hell, our war's chicken feed compared to this, man. Eh? Absolute repression. It's
And
scary.
and there was this guy lauded as hosted by the Queen, given the royal treatment. Um,
Yeah,
the rules didn't apply to people like Idi Amin, did they?
not at all. I mean, the thing is, the Brits always said, and I wrote about this. The Brits always said he was one of the warrior tribes that were very good in the King's African Rifles. Um, he was loyal, aggressive. Um, yeah, he was ideal NCO material, if you like,
Yes, yes.
um, because he could whip his others into shape, and he was, as I said, the warrior tribe, and the Brits loved him for a while. They loved him. They thought he had done the whole thing. He'd got rid of the socialism of Milton Obote and all that.
Mm.
It took a while for the Brits to sort of start realizing really what was going on in Uganda. Um,
I think, like a lot of these things, they knew exactly what was going on, but it didn't suit them to
well, precisely,
take
precisely.
a contrarian sort of position. But
Yeah,
Angus, just a little bit, well, we could talk for a lot longer. But the other trouble spots that you went to in Africa, conflict areas, during that period, there was a lot going on.
yeah. Well, of course, we had um, after independence in Zim, we had troubles in Mozambique. Um, uh, Renamo started, fighting for Limo and all that, and it was alleged to have been funded by, or trained and funded up by ex-Rhodesians who had gone to South Africa and wanted to destabilize Mozambique and our eastern border again. So, I mean, that also became a very complicated issue
Mm.
um, with Rwanda and with Mozambique, Renamo, and then of course we had the Matabeleland Gokorohundi thing here. Um, Disputed how many people were killed in that thing, but the conventional wisdom is 30,000 civilians, and we go down there to try and report on it, but it was sealed up, totally sealed off for us, um, and it was extraordinary because we knew what was going on from the Catholic missionaries and stuff, and the Gokorohundi thing, North Korean trained, brutal. I mean, there were accounts from mostly the Catholic priests that the brutality that went on there. I mean, Parent Shiri, who later was to become Air Force commander, he, according to the priests and stuff we spoke to, I mean, he was a brute. And one occasion, he ripped a baby up a woman's back and smashed it against the wall, smashed its head against the wall. You know, that sort of stuff was absolutely unbelievable. And um, civilians in the crossfire, because they were accused of harboring Nkomo's resistance. Um, you know, it was much. We couldn't report much about it because we were virtually under house arrest in the Holiday Inn in Bulawayo, and we tried to go out. We were stopped by spooks and all kinds of people and soldiers. And Rex Nongo actually said to me one day, he said, "I wouldn't go out of there. I wouldn't go down there uh, because there's landmines all over and it'll be too dangerous for you guys." Now he said, "Well, we'll take our chance. We've been on this sort of scene before." Um, anyway, it came. Gurundi was finally exposed by by the Observer and Robin Drew, who was Argus Africa News Service. They were able to sneak in there at night and stuff. Um, and
Not Peter Godwin.
it, no, Peter Godwin claimed it was him in Makuru, his book Makuru, but I know he took an interest in it, but it was essentially the Observer and Robin Drew and Donald Telford came down here with his stringer, a guy called Goldman Matatu, and they went down there and they talked to priests and survivors and stuff, which I'm not sure that Godwin did. I mean, I know he boasted about it, um, but and there was a funny story that came out later because Donald Telford said later, the editor of the Observer, he was invited for lunch by Prince Charles, the then Prince Charles. And Prince Charles said over lunch, he said, Donald, old chap, why don't you lay off with Zimbabwe? And Trevor said, no, there's bad things happening there in Matabele land. Um, and Charles said to him, McDonald, old chap, this message comes from direct from Mrs. Thatcher. Won't you leave Zimbabwe alone? Because we like Mr. Mugabe. He's the darling of the West. In those early years, I'm talking about up to 84, 85. He's the darling of the West, and then, of course, we're 87. We had the internal settlement, where Mugabe became the executive president as opposed to prime minister. But it was Gurundi. I think the Gurundi thing was scary, man. And one of the Herald guys who tried to he was an Ndebele. He wrote about it and he got fired immediately, and sent out to Coventry, if you like. So that was the sort of beginning of the conflict, and then of course we had these years of great optimism. 88,
Yeah.
88 to early 90s. We had a sort of glasnost type thing where you could say and write things that. There was an openness then, but then that soon clamped down as they started, as the war vets, the ex-combatants started saying that the chefs were ripping off their their benefits, and so it was, yeah, it was an interesting and very sad transition in many ways. Um, and then, of course, Somalia blew up and all these other things. So then I was told, okay, you know enough about this, so you can go up and do Somalia. That was the first Somali war that I did. Siad Barre, General Siad Barre against Ethiopians, and Mengistu, and then of course Mengistu got exiled here and blah blah blah, that sort of thing. So it's been an interesting road. And then after that there was Rwanda, Liberia, Somalia was the scary. That was so scary, and it still is. In fact, still is. I follow all these things now. Somalia was scary, and we got into. Well, the Americans bombed a villa that was supposed to be holding a rally by the main warlord there, and of course we saw these damn choppers and firing rockets at this building, and there were a lot of people there, and a lot of people killed, and so of course as journos we went down, and then the mob turned on us. So, and four of my colleagues were killed. Three of us got away, and I got away by the skin of my teeth because they tried to. We had bodyguards in Somalia, and they started firing AKs into the air and gave me a respite to jump back in the car. But then the mob tried to turn over the car. My photographer was killed like 5 meters from me. We had flak jackets, but he was bashed on the head with a rock first, and then shot. They ripped up his flak jacket. But notice that was. Look, I guess my national service here, equipped me for a lot of that, because when I went to these zones, I could tell the other journos, the other hacks, that's incoming, that's ambush spot, all that sort of thing. But it didn't take away from the seriousness of it. And so I don't know, but then I made it my business to throughout all of this. I made it my business to try and try and understand the new order in Africa, and why young people went to join, the Zanla struggle. And I know because after independence, I mixed with a lot of these ex-combatants and young women who were sort of frog marched across the border into Mosa. Um, and they were put into barracks, and some of them put into sand cells. They were raped and abused by some of the chefs, some of the commanders, the sector commanders. And I started thinking to myself, "Oof, yeah, it's not my fault I was born here," you know. But we had this terrible burden of having colonized and stolen everything. Well, just look at what's being stolen now, for God's sake.
Angus, just going back a bit, apropos of this article that I've just written after reading what James McManus wrote in the
Yeah,
Spectator about the intelligence failures. What
yeah.
is your take on people like Ken Flower and Derek Robinson working for the British intelligence services?
Well, yes. Ken Flower, he wrote a book called Serving Secretly, which I have. He strenuously avoided all those allegations.
Mm.
Um, but he was an MI6 informant. There's no doubt in our minds then, because he had to keep on the side of the Brits as best he could with feeding them with intelligence, if you like. I I I think we many of us, especially in the media, took that for granted that he was playing chess with MI6 and getting stuff from them and you know moving uh, uh, moving pieces around the board. And
Mm.
um, there was certainly that. I mean, and I knew all these guys, and interestingly enough, when he died, Ken Plough had a whole bunch of files of confidential, top secret files in his house, um, which were spirited away. There was a lot of stuff, in his book. He didn't mention some of the depths of it, but all the files were spirited away after he died when they were cleaning his house. Um, so I'm quite sure there was collusion. Ken Plough used to just brush it off. He'd say, you know, how's the Foreign Office? How are your MI6 guys?" And he would just brush it off like that. But no, I'm quite sure there was collusion. But then, in a sense, that's an opportunity of war. If you can consult, if you can consult with your, not necessarily with your enemies, which we did at the frontline meetings, but if you could consult with your sort of untrustworthy allies to get to find out what was going on from their side of the things, because they were interested. And as I said, um, right up until Lord Soames came and everything, um, Jeremy Thorpe had said we must go and bomb Rhodesia after UDI and all that. And Jeremy, but there was that whole. Also, I've said in my little book, which I've just published on Amazon. It was very much. Jeremy Thorpe was howled down by the kith and kin. People said, no, my actual my older brother was at Sandhurst in '65, and after UDI, they told him, "You better go back to Rhodesia now, because you're a rebel of the crown." And he said, "No, no, no, we don't mind that. I we haven't got anything there. My family farm has been taken over by Lord Graham, blah blah blah." And he had nothing to come back to, so he joined the British forces from Sandhurst. And extraordinary. I mean, I spoke to him later on about this kith and kin issue. Jeremy Thorpe said must send in the Royal Air Force to bomb Smith and all that. And the kith and kin issue in the UK was very strong at that time. And of course, Jeremy Thorpe, Liberal leader, turned out to be gay and all that. So we all called him the Moffy, No, no one's going to listen to the Morphe. No.
Well,
But
it's funny
anyway,
that it's funny, Angus. That's what I wrote about this last article. I don't know whether I'm barking up the wrong tree, but there does seem to be a some sort of a link between all these. If you look at the BBC, the Foreign
yeah,
Office,
yeah,
MI6, there were a lot of homosexuals in high places. The Liberal
big time. Well,
Party,
as you know, yeah, yeah,
and I don't think they like the look of these Rhodesians. These Rhodesians were everything that they.
precisely. You know, as you say, Kim Philby and all those guys, and Anthony Blunt and all those guys. I mean, yeah, no, it's just so. Well, I've always said it was sort of upper class. Oh, and I was watching a documentary the other day. Even Earl Mountbatten,
Mhm,
the famed Earl Mountbatten,
mhm.
had
He was a pervert,
boy, boy lovers. Yes, 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 yes.
absolute
Earl
pervert.
Mountbatten,
I know, and his
Earl
wife, I think,
Mountbatten,
was
for God's
having
sake.
a good time with Neri.
Yeah, that's right, exactly. So, I mean, what are we going to do? Here we are trying to survive and develop, um, develop our farming and stuff. And we did a lot of call-ups in the farming areas, and you know, liaising with part two sticks and all this stuff. But extraordinary infrastructure we had built up, um, and you know, colonial. It is a whole sort of new wave anti-colonialism and neo-imperialism. But who's the neo-imperialist now? China. You know, Hannes, we've got so many damn Chinese here now. We've got 300,000 Chinese here now. The church up the road is advertising Chinese lessons for children. We got 300,000 Chinese here now. And at independence, we're the minority with 275,000. So there are more Chinese here now than there were Marungus at
And
independence.
and and I've got to say, I think we were more passionate about trying to put something into the country than they are. They
Good.
really are there to extract what they can and have no
Well, I
interest
couldn't
in.
agree more. I couldn't agree more. I mean, it's the commitment, and you know, when I don't go out to the farming areas anymore because it's too depressing. But you know, a friend of mine's son came over from Canada the other day and went to see the farm where he grew up. My God, it's gone. It's
Can't recognize
devastated.
it.
Eh?
Probably can't recognize it.
No, he didn't. The homestead is gone. They've stolen all the bricks and stuff. The Chinese are doing gold panning there. It's not growing a thing except weeds. And I mean, he came back in tears and said he never wants to come back. Because you know, when you grow up in a place, in a farmhouse, your old man's a successful farmer. Um, and you come back and see the place lying there. The roof tiles from the old homestead had been sold. The bricks had all been sold on the side of the road and everything. I mean, it's
Heartbreaking.
kind of different. But you know, I try to understand all this, and I try to get into this nationalism thing, and I got very close to a lot of ex-combatants. You know, who told me stories. There was one funny story. We there's quite a senior sector commander who became a member of FIFA, the Football Association here, and we went off to Cameroon. We had a match in Cameroon, and he was an ex in a serious way. And he goes to Cameroon. This was in the early '80s. He goes to Cameroon, and when he comes back, he says, we were lucky to have had a little longer white rule than they did because you know, open. He said I was fighting against white rule, but we were lucky to have a bit longer white rule because you want to see what happens in Cameroon. Um, open open sewers, people living in shacks. And of course the rich also living in the nice hotels and stuff. But he actually said, you know, we were lucky to have a little more white rule than others. You know?
Angus,
um,
I just want to go back again. You were
yeah,
saying you had a very nice, quite a good relationship with Mugabe, but just tell us about your fallout and how you ended up on hard times in your personal relationship with Mugabe.
yeah. Well, wait, you know, whenever I was late for a press conference, Mugabe used to say to the others, "Where's Angus? Where's Angus?" You know, and when I walked in, he would say, "Hello, Angus," and then It was during the farm invasions, actually. It's a long story, but I'll cut it short. Um, I had a friend who worked as a mechanic at the grain marketing board. And you know what we do? We go off and have a cup of tea and catch up with the gossip and all that every so often on a quiet day. So I go down to the GMB at Aspendale, and I see all these Zambian trucks there offloading maize. And that maize has been grown by the Zim farmers who fled to Zambia after they lost everything, you know. Well, our farms were barren. We were now importing grain from Zambia, grown by our own guys.
Mm.
And, I pointed this out in the story for the Associated Press, who I work for them. Mugabe was furious, absolutely furious. Land redistribution, you're attacking land distribution, you're sending out information prejudicial to state security. And I got arrested. The thing is, Hannes, the grain marketing board at Aspendale, the fences are all broken and everything, but it's government property. And I used to drive my car, and there, some CIO fellow saw it and took a picture of it on his phone. And I was now trespassing on restricted government property to send out information prejudicial to the political color of the country. The people were hungry then, and all this wet maize was coming in from the Zim farmers in Zambia. Anyway, that he got furious, and
You were arrested?
had me.
Tell us about that. What actually happened? Where were you arrested? Where did they hold you?
They picked me up on the street. Actually, I was walking actually out of the Ambassador Hotel when they picked me up, and they've been watching. They've been watching me. Picked me up, took me to Central. Pretty horrendous place. The Central Police, old colonial building, But oh my God, pretty horrendous. And they made me strip to my underpants and interrogated me and sat me on a concrete floor, locked me up. Then my lawyer came and did the magic and said, "Look, you haven't charged him, so you better release him." And then they told me that the charges were there were no bail for the charges on security matters. So I was advised to take the gap after spending 3 days in Central, overcrowded. Oh, Hannes, you don't want to go into the jail around here. I'm telling you, man. Anyway, I got out, and I was told to, get a very low profile. But how can you have a low profile around Harare? I mean, I stayed in the Wild Geese for a couple of nights, Wild Geese Lodge, and then it dawned on me that I'd better get out. I'd been told I'd better get out because I had to. There was no bail if I went to court, and they'd leaked that there was going to be a conviction, and there was no bail. And after my little sojourn in Harare Central Police cells, which was horrific, I thought, no, time to go. So I snuck across the border into Zambia. There was an all points thing out for me when I disappeared. But I got driven to Chirundu, and we got there at 6 in the morning when it opened. We brought newspapers and vodka for the guys because the guy I went with was a farmer, and we were able to. No, he was quite a regular crosser at Chirundu, and I was in a big farmer's hat and sunglasses, and I got away, and that. Then they moved on to other security threats and stuff and other paranoia. And I got the word from my lawyer, well, you can come back. And I came back safely. And I thought at one point I'd never be able to come back because I was on the wanted list. But anyway, they moved on. And
you came back, and you've been back ever since. Angus, you had an interesting fallout with General Mujuru.
Yes. No, I knew him quite well, actually. And we he owned a little bar down the road here in Eastleigh Shops, and now I got to know him quite well, and I had interviewed him a couple of times. You know, he wasn't very fluent in English, and then I wrote a piece for Horizon magazine about his dogs had killed some children in Bindura, Shamba, somewhere there. And I wrote a little satirical piece about their dogs of war or something. You know, he had some wild dogs there, and they'd killed a couple of local children. Anyway, he sued me. I'd also talked about all his properties that he had acquired, and you know, and one of the things I'd spoken to, you know, we had a thing called the Leadership Code after independence, and they should only have one rural home and one city home, you know. But he had farms, he had cars, he had everything. I wrote a fair piece and a balanced piece, but he sued me. And when we went to court, he said he said that when he saw it was this little white man who'd written this bad stuff about him, he wanted damages. And he said when he saw it was this little white man, he wanted to get his service pistol and take it to this man and teach him a lesson. This little white man. And our lawyer, Adrian de Bourbon, stood up and said, "My lord, may the court record clearly show that the plaintiff wishes to kill my client." So, anyway, we lost that case. We won that case. And Judge Tijasiku, who later on became Chief Justice, he awarded the costs to us from Majuru. And then, and you know how those court cases, they cost a bit of money. Eh? Majuru was ordered, the charges were deemed as the libel was deemed as frivolous and no standing. So Majuri was supposed to pay costs to Adrian de Bourbon, Horizon magazine, blah blah blah, and he never paid. And when the sheriff of the court went to one of his farms, I think it was in Rua, to do some seizures of stuff so that we could pay some of our costs. He came out with a primed AK and shooed away the sheriff, and the sheriff said, "Sorry guys, we're not going back there," you know. And so we never got paid. And you know, lawyers want their money, but if the guy who has to pay costs refuses to pay, who pays? We have to dip into our little piggy bank and pay the lawyers, although they gave us lots of time to pay, I must admit. But it was crazy. So, and then of course he was killed later, Majuru, in a mysterious fire, which we all covered, and it was, you know, he was a significant force in politics, although he might not have been very fluent in English, but my God, he had a clever cunning about him, which I knew from our first meetings. He was clever and he was cunning. Gosh. You know, I went to his office once, and in KG6, the barracks there, and on his desk was one telephone. In those days, it was those round telephones. He had one telephone, nothing else, because it was all in here, and he was plotting in here. He was an amazing guy, cunning as a fox. I mean, no paperwork I could see in his office. No paperwork. Unbelievable. Cunning.
Amazing, yeah.
And he had a pub down the road, and he always carried a sidearm. You know, when his jacket would open, you could see his sidearm. I think it was a Tokarev or something. And what interested me about the fire, he never was without his sidearm. What interested me about the fire, they never found in the ruin, in the rubble, the ashes of his farm, they never found the sidearm, which indicated to me those days that he'd been taken out, and he was never, I mean, people who knew him better than me, he was never without a firearm. And that was never found in the ruins of the farm in Beatrice.
Angus,
I mean, he was into power broking. He was in with some Israeli gold and diamond dealers. So, and the interesting thing about that, Hannes, was the the forensics couldn't find anything, so they bundled up uh, the, the his remains, bundled up his remains in plastic bags and sent them down south to have them analysed. And of course, by then it was too late to get any meaningful forensic information out of that. In
Well,
other
we'll
words,
never know.
no, we never know.
Angus, just before we finish, I just want to, you did mention the chaps that you've tried to help post-war,
Yeah,
blokes who've struggled dealing with being civilians again, and just
yeah,
um, a lot of casualties, a lot of long-term casualties from wars, no doubt about it.
yeah, yeah. Look, I knew particularly a young RLI man who'd killed his first person when he was like 18, and he was in Fire Force and he killed a lot of people. Hey, but that was the way it was. Kill or be killed. Blah blah blah. Fire Force. He'd gone into RLI when he was 17. Um, Presumably they did things like the Bayonet Friday. Anyway, these youngsters, and you know, he just couldn't cope. He couldn't cope. Turned to drink, begging. There was a compound out at Cleveland Dam where some of these guys used to go, and I used to go out there and take sort of antiseptic creams and stuff like that because they were getting bitten by it. And there was bush, and they were in these sort of little tented plastic encampments, and you know, and Ginger, his name was, he didn't last. He drank himself to death, got AIDS, um,
Terrible.
from. And the interesting thing, Hannes, he, Cleveland is just by Mabuku Township, and there was a man who, from 18, was killing people in Fire Force RLI. Just couldn't cope as civilian. He had PTSD, whatever they call it now, PTSD, um, and he just went down, and I lived another 30 years. But for a man like that,
Yeah, very
he had
sad.
AIDS. He had AIDS.
Lost it.
The women from the township used to come and collect wood in the woods there at Cleveland, and anyway, he obviously had sex with them and everything, and he withered away. Drank. They were drinking cachaça, all the rough spirits that come, that are
Very sad.
distilled. Yeah,
Angus,
and cheap vodka, all that stuff. I mean, and he wasn't the only one I knew there. They were desperate, and I'm not saying that. But the interesting thing, Hannes, was after the war, there was no sort of
safe.
we had to pull our socks up. There was no sort of support, mental support,
No
and I'm
safety
not.
net.
Eh?
No safety net. Nothing to fall back on.
No,
No
and
support.
all right, look, it was a small minority who couldn't cope. I mean, we were quite tough. We were made to be tough by the
Mm.
bayonet fighting and stuff like that. But no, there's no support, and I made the mistake of reading Prince Harry's book, and whenever they came back from combat in the Brits in Afghanistan or wherever, they would get 3 days social counselling, blah blah blah. We in Rhodesia were just told, pull up your socks, China. You know what I mean. But I'm saying it wasn't a big number, but you know, when you see some of the shit that we saw, um,
Well,
you know, it's disturbing, and sometimes you can't cope. I mean, I still have nightmares about Rwanda, and that's 30 years ago, for God's sake. Bodies,
yeah,
bodies,
when you
bodies
think about it,
piled ceiling high almost, and the streets. Oh, and there they use machete, and oh yeah. That was anyway. That's another story.
Angus, just before we close, just tell us a little bit about your book. Have you got a copy there, and how do people? I'm sure a
Yeah,
lot
let
of
me just.
people would like to
Yeah, let
get
me
there.
let me just get one quickly. I've got I mean, okay. Now, there it is. Can you
Oh,
see it?
no. Yeah, and is this a biography, an
This
autobiography?
is a memoir, a
Okay, good.
memoir. And
Looks very
it's
interesting.
got, eh?
Looks
No,
interesting,
it's
Angus. But it's only available on Amazon.
at the moment, but, after thinking I might have to publish a few hard copies because,
Yeah, okay.
people are, yeah,
But just
but,
hold it up again, Angus. Angus will take a minute. Well, that looks very interesting.
and it's a
Um,
good, well, people who've seen it say it's a good read. Um, it's, as you see there, from Rhodesia bushwar to Africa's killing fields, a reporter's journey. And there's your typewriter with bullets all around it. But no, I've had some quite nice reviews. Very nice reviews, actually.
all right, Angus. Well, listen, thanks a hell of a lot for your time. It's been absolutely fascinating. There's nobody else I know who's got a story like yours to tell.
Well,
And
thank you, Angus.
really nice
It's
to be
been
in touch.
it's been a long ride. Well, let's keep in touch, eh? Let's keep in touch.
Okay, buddy. I'll give you a shout.
Yeah.
Hopefully we can have a
Tell
beer
me
together.
when. Yeah, very much so. Okay. All right, Hannes.
Cheers,
Thanks so much.
Angus.
All
Thanks,
right.
sir.
Ciao for
Bye.
now. Ciao. Ciao.